Hello, everyone. Happy Friday to you all. Happy Friday. I know for many of us, we're probably glad to see the end of the week. It has been quite a week, but I am so glad that you're here with us today, a part of our vodcast community. For those of you who are joining us maybe for the first time, I am Dr. Nika White. My pronouns are she, her, and I'm the founder and lead principal consultant for NWC. And we work tirelessly week after week after week, and we have done so for the past 5 years to bring you this virtual learning experience so that we can, in community, go deeper in processing some of the most social complex issues that we're finding ourselves faced with today. And we like to do that by amplifying themes of diversity, equity, inclusion, belonging with leadership and business. So we're so glad you're here. Please go to the chat. Let us know where you are joining the conversation from. That is always a big treat for us to see the many different geographies that are represented across this broad community. We know that we have some folks that join us by registering in advance and showing up for our Zoom community, but then we also have a number of people that will also catch us live on LinkedIn. So regardless of how in which you found your way to us, we are so grateful, and we look forward to really rich dialogue today with our guest co-host. I also want to remind you that at NWC, we really do value disability inclusion. So we have closed caption that has been enabled for those who would like to take advantage of that. If you are on LinkedIn Live today, I want you to know you can stay connected to this community by using the comment section. My team is watching that closely. We're bringing all of those great sentiments and thoughts and resources and questions into this broader community so that we all can be connected. And so we appreciate you in that regard. Cameras are always encouraged. We love to see smiling faces, but certainly never required. We're just glad you're here, whatever capacity. So welcome again to Intentional Conversations, where we're celebrating 5 years, and let the conversations begin. Welcome. Let the conversations begin, and that is precisely what we are going to do. I just mentioned that this is our 5-year anniversary for bringing intentional conversations to this community, and we are so grateful for the support that we have received over the 5 years. We're going to be having some special events this year, so stay tuned because I'm going to share with you about the first one that's coming up as we recognize and celebrate our 5th-year anniversary of intentional conversations. But first, we are still in the month of January, so I want you to be reminded that January is National Mentoring Month. It was established in 2002. Mentoring is one of the most selfless things that people can do to add value to another person. And so I hope that you're one of those individuals that's adding value in a very meaningful way by mentoring. So February is right around the corner. And while you may have heard that there's some entities that perhaps think that Black History Month has been canceled, it has not. It is here and it is alive. And we certainly are gearing up at NWC to be of support to any organizations who are kind of scrambling at the last minute to figure out what type of programming we want to bring in honor and recognition of all of the things that the Black community has contributed throughout history and even in present day. And so make sure you're keeping that in mind and reach out to us. We'd love to be a resource for you. Now, January also marks the 2-year anniversary of my book, Baby, Inclusion Uncomplicated. This is book number 3. It was released in 2023, and it was in partnership with Forbes Books. It has also released just this month in a paperback version. So I have been promoting that and sharing that out. So for those of you who do not have this as part of your library, I hope that you will consider getting it and sharing it out with others. Thanks in advance. LinkedIn Learning. This is one of those resources that we value being able to be connected with because it gives us a chance to center our voice of authority around many key topics that we know are really important to today's workplace. And so if you have not yet checked out any of my LinkedIn Learning courses, I hope that you will do so. We will place a link into the chat for you to have access to each of those sessions, or at least to be able to know how to access those sessions. There are 4 courses total available, and I appreciate the support in this regard. Now, there is another program that I'm super excited about, and this is something that's really near and dear to my heart. I realize that with all that's going on, that women of color, particularly Black women, we need a space of safety, of protection, of community, of leadership and empowerment. And so we have created what's known as Boundless, which is a women's community of well-being, empowerment, and leadership. And this is a way for us to help women of color come together and to break barriers, to have meaningful impact, and confidently navigate their growth journeys wherever they may find themselves on that growth journey. So we are starting a community endeavor where we're opening this up not only to organizations, but also just to the broader community. And once we reach our critical mass of cohort members, we will close that class. And so be sure that you're staying tuned. We will place a link into the chat for you all to take a look at more information that's on our website right now about Boundless. But I'm so excited about it. Another program offering that we have in place is storytelling. Now, storytelling is not new at all, right? But what I am finding is that being very intentional to create a storytelling culture within the workplace environment is not something that many organizations are doing. Storytelling can impact our decision-making ability, our ability to deepen our empathy and compassion and collaboration. So there's so much value to having a storytelling culture. And we have a framework and methodology that we want to be able to support your organization through. So if this is of interest, go to the link that we're going to place into the chat and into the comment section if you're on LinkedIn Live, and we'd love to be in conversation with you about how to do that effectively. Now, this is the part that I'm really excited about. I told you it's our 5th year anniversary for Intentional Conversations, and we're going to be celebrating in multiple ways, one of which is in addition to bringing you a new episode every Friday of the week in this calendar year during our normal time, this hour, we also are going to be doing some special reunion episodes. And the first one is scheduled for February 24th. It's going to be an evening event from 6 to 7 p.m. And listen, I do not know if you know of these names, but these women are absolutely incredible. They are dear friends of mine. We have been in a brain trust group supporting each other in so many different regards, but the conversation is going to be fire. So what you need to know is sign up, register. It is free, no cost at all. We will also go live on LinkedIn. We will place the link into the chat so that you all can have access to that information. I'm also equally excited to share that as we kick off the month of February, we have some wonderful guest co-hosts that's going to be joining us, one of which is Katrina Jones on the 7th. So make sure you mark your calendars for that. Then we also have Michael Palacillo, who's going to be joining us on Valentine's Day, February the 14th. He does a lot of work in the space of accessibility, which is very much a part of this broad intentional conversation. And so I want to make sure that we can hear from him and his expertise. So join us on those dates. Now, last but not least, you know that it's always my great pleasure to kick us off by, before bringing on our guest co-host, to give a formal introduction of that individual. I like for our community to know the accolades, the credentials, the experiences in which our guest co-hosts show up to our conversation with. And so today will be no different. And I am thrilled to be able to introduce to you Dr. Karen Hills Pruden. Dr. Karen Hills Pruden is the CEO of Pruden Global Business Solutions Consulting, a premier professional development and leadership training company with over 30 years of experience. Dr. Pruden has created trademark frameworks that drive transformational change for leaders and organizations worldwide. Her organization, which is also known as PGBSC programs, they're built on powerful, proven methodologies, including the Amplify Your Value framework, which helps leaders to leverage their expertise to advance. The LPT, which stands for Learn, Practice, and Teach framework. I love frameworks. And that is designed to create a continuous cycle of learning and growth. We always should be on that path. And the PE, known as Professional Equity. Really, really important. That framework empowers professionals to convert their experience into measurable business success, leadership excellence, ensuring that clients are not just seen and heard, but are positioned to make lasting impact. Dr. Pruden is a best-selling author, published 30 times plus, and a sought-after global leadership speaker, radio podcast, and television guest. And so you know what to do now if you've been a part of our community. I want you to find those accolades, find those words of affirmation. I'm going to stop sharing my screen so that I can bring our guest co-host into the spotlight. And I want you just to take a moment to welcome her in whatever way that feels appropriate. We want her to know how grateful we are to have her here today. And Dr. Pruden, before I release you to greet this audience in your own way, we do have a tradition here. And that tradition is we ask for our guest co hosts to, after we've heard their credentials through their bio, to share with us something that we would not know from hearing your bio, which we've just done, or even looking at your profile. And because we're really centering storytelling as a very powerful tool this year, feel free to share a story or just whatever you think is going to help us connect deeper with who you are and how you're showing up today. And thank you for being here, by the way. Welcome.
Thank you for having me. I am so excited about this conversation we are about to have. And absolutely, I will share with your community something that you actually need to be up close and personal with me to actually know this. So, I am one who believes in creativity and illustrating what I love through how I dress. I really had a interest in fashion at a very young age. I thought I was going to be a model until my relatives kept quenching my dreams by saying you're too short, you're too short, you're too short. So for those of you who haven't met me in person, I'm less than 5 feet. And so I continue to creatively express myself through fashion. So at a point in my lifetime, I've been here a little under 60 years on this earth. I amassed a collection of about 400 pairs of shoes at the max.
Wow.
And I love shoes. I actually start my outfits each morning around the shoes that I want to wear for that day. And that is something that came out of a pain point in my life where I didn't really connect it until later in life. So I grew up in a very working class family, and my mom believed that you had church shoes, school shoes, and special occasion shoes. And so after my school shoes, I would come home and change into my play shoes. Well, that meant I only had about 2 or 3 pairs of shoes that I could wear at any given time throughout the season. And so the fashionista, budding fashionista myself, believed that those shoes did not match everything that I wore. And so I had black and brown for the winter, and I had white and off white for the summer. And so I believe that is where my love for shoes came into play because when I started working in my early teen years, one of the first things that I bought was a pair of shoes that I wanted. They were designer shoes. And my mom was like, I'm going to buy this wallet and I'm going to buy this purse, and you're on your own about the shoes. And so I got my first job at 13, bought a pair of designer shoes. And so I believe that's where my love for shoes came into play. And these are not just designer shoes. I like shoes at Walmart, Target. It doesn't matter. I have a love of shoes. If they speak to me, I purchase them. And so you got to be close to me to know that I have a love of shoes. But yeah, at one time I owned about 400 pair.
Wow. Thank you so much for sharing that. We're getting some great love into the chat. Apparently, we have some folks here that are also shoe lovers, including myself, or you're being labeled as a fashion diva. And so that is so fantastic. Andrea also said, I can relate. We had school shoes, house shoes, church shoes that we had to polish the night before church, and we wore the church shoes on special occasions. You're right. I was so tickled, Dr. Pruden, when you said my play shoes, because before you use that language, I thought to myself, yeah, my daughter calls them play shoes. Like if she goes to the gym, I got to put my play shoes on. So totally get that. I love it. And what a way to not let someone define your future for you by labeling you short and saying that that's going to be something that's going to keep you from fulfilling, things that you're passionate about. And so I love that confident attitude. I think that is tremendous and we all need it. So I want to take a deep breath for myself. And if you need to take a deep breath, Dr. Pruden, you do so. And I'm going to invite this entire audience to just take a deep breath. Just let it go. And whether you all needed that or not, I needed it. And my hope is that just that moment of pause in understanding what our nervous system is doing right now gives us the ability to have that awareness to think about what are some self-soothing techniques that we may need as we go into this weekend. And I say that with the heaviness that I know so many people have been carrying over the past couple weeks. And I've been hearing a lot of people say that January feels like it's been the longest year ever. And it has. It has felt like a century. So much has happened. And I do want to acknowledge and send out thoughts and prayers to the families of those who were part of the American Airlines crash that happened. I actually was in DC and scheduled to fly out the next night, which was last night, and I was flying out of DCA, and so it was very unnerving. And I was telling my sister, my daughter, who traveled with me as we were walking through the airport, that it felt very eerily quiet, and it wasn't the most confident day to travel. Let's put it that way. But my family, we are people of faith. And so we got on that plane, we recovered, we got home safely. But my heart certainly goes out to all of those families that are missing loved ones today, and they're dealing with the reality of having to live life without those loved ones. And so I wanted us all to take a moment of time just to acknowledge that. And the deep breath was not only for us to think about those who maybe are suffering right now in ways that are unimaginable to us, but for us to also think about that what we can control is what we can control. And when we think about what we can control, I think that it helps to ground us in how in which we will activate that, right? And so for me, the worrying, not to say that I am perfect at really putting aside what's happening with all of the changes with under the current new administration, but I am choosing to be selective about how much I consume information wise, what I consume information wise. And I am really focusing on what is most useful to me. And what's most useful to me in terms of the sequence, the type of content, the frequency, it's going to look different for everyone else. And so I want each person to just really embrace spending some time reflecting on what does that look like for me so that we can control where we can control, right? And so, Dr. Pruden, I want to turn it over to you and just ask you how are you processing? You and I have not spoken about the administration. We haven't spoken about any of this. And so honestly, I don't know how you're showing up to this conversation, but I want to leave space and time for that because I can only imagine that many of us, regardless of maybe how we voted and how we feel about where we landed, there's some angst and some level of anxiety that probably many of us are holding that just deserves time and space for us to be able to socialize around. And so share with us how you're processing.
Absolutely. And so it's a very emotional time. I am also a prior community leader of the local chapter of our NAACP. And so I've been
Mm,
called upon by different people in the community to just get my thoughts on the various executive orders that have been signed and the impact on the federal employees as well as the private employees, because private
yeah.
employees are not exempt. And so I actually went into student mode. I am one who likes to get into the details and understand that I don't want to fall under the Trojan horse syndrome where you just look at what's happening on the surface and not dig down into the details. So I've actually read a couple of the executive orders just to get into the details to see what the specifics of it and how widespread it is. And it is very alarming. And so I have been using what I know as my words of education based on what I've read to kind of quell some of the hysteria that's going on in the community. I also have a daughter who works for federal government, so she's directly impacted. But right now is the time for us to go through the emotion, but also do the research to find out what's really going on and how it's impacting us and those around us and figure out what are our options. And so I've been helping people in my community and my family do that. Like, let's go through the emotional and mental part of it, but also let's dig deep and see how is it really impacting you in terms of immediately, as well as what delayed decisions do you need to make that may impact your career or your family.
Yeah, no, I appreciate that. And I think it's important again for everyone to kind of find what is going to work best for you during this moment, during this time, because it's going to continue to evolve and the information overload can be very overwhelming. And so I think that just having a sense of what we have the emotional capacity to consume and how often is really important reflection point for each of us individually. So a lot of your work is in the space of leadership. So I want to stay in this vein, and we're not going to stay here the whole time. I will assure you of that, because again, I believe that we need to also gravitate towards positivity and what we can control. And I think this is an area that may provide some great insight for those of us who are leaders and we're looking for ways to be able to show up in this moment. What are you sharing maybe with some of those that fall under your purview, either through clients or coaching clients, but just individuals that are looking for some level of advice for how do I show up as a leader right now in an organization, recognizing that we have people that are across the spectrum on how they're feeling about this issue. So you don't want to not acknowledge it, but when you do acknowledge it, is how do I do that? And that's a real question that I know that I've received. And so I'm just curious as to what type of counsel are you providing to those individuals?
Yes, absolutely. I actually even created, in addition to having conversation, I went ahead and created a one pager last night on how to assist individuals on how to kind of navigate in the workplace during this season. And some of the information that I thought about and I put pen to paper about that document was, how do you continue to bring your A game, recognizing that there's an emotional and mental impact that's going on within you while you're in the workplace. Because we cannot lose sight of all of the work that we've done to build our careers, for some of us decades, the reputational value that we've amassed, on on our area expertise and how we
Right.
conduct ourselves, because we are experiencing the emotional and mental impact of what's going on around us. And so, a few things which I have provided the link to your staff to go ahead
Right.
and offer it as a free document. But you got to be a master of your craft. Let's think
Mhm.
about what got us here, what got us to these places that we're in the professional world. Is that you need to be undeniably the best of the best in terms of being a master of your craft. How you have been performing before, continue to perform that way. Do not allow the what's going on in the environment, because our environment has a lot to do with our mental and emotional health and how we show up at
Mm.
work. And so, if you need to get some resources, whether it's through your employee assistance program or if it's through talking to someone, a trusted friend or advisor, then get the resources so that you can have an unfiltered conversation outside of the workplace, so that you can go into the workplace and bring your A game. Because now more than ever is when you'll need to leverage your professional equity. And what is your professional equity? I talk about it a lot. Of course, it's one of my frameworks, but it is your relationships up and down the chain. It is your relationships in and out of your business. It could be your vendors, your creditors. It could be your like businesses that you're doing work with. It is also your area expertise. What is the problem that you solve in your space, in your lane of brilliance? And does everybody know that you are the problem solver for that problem? So you need to have your relationships, you need to have your area expertise, and then you also need to have your reputation. What are people saying about you in and out of the room? And so now is the time when you got some companies talking about downsizing, when you got some companies talking about adding additional duties, they're getting rid of whole departments and whole divisions, whether you
Mm.
rename it or not. It's in a, whether you rename it or not, if you can get that. I've read the executive order. And so
Oh yeah.
now what you are known for is more powerful in the market and in the workplace more than ever. And so you need to make sure that people are clear about what you are an expert in. And there are a couple of other things, but they're all on the free handout. But now is the time to bring your A game. And in order to bring your A game, we may need to get some resources, whether it's talking to a trusted friend or talking to someone through our EAP benefits, so that we can continue to bring our A game to work. As long as we are still employed or still have our business, we are still in the game.
Absolutely. Such great counsel. Thank you so much. I want to comment on some of the nuggets that you just shared. First of all, I love the nomenclature of professional equity. It reminds me of when, we say stuff like social capital. So I would imagine that's kind of similar to it. It's your professional capital. It's what have you already gained credence and value in that you can leverage for your ability and for the ability of others that you want to lift. And so I appreciate that. You talked about, we did just share the link, by the way, to the free download. So thank you for that gift. We love when guest co-hosts come bringing gifts to our community. So thank you for that. We don't take that lightly. Make sure you're downloading that resource that's just been shared. But you talked about finding trusted friends, confidants, either through, some of the maybe therapy sessions or other professionals through EAP programs. And what comes to mind for me is this strong sense of need for community. And we have heard that language in some shape or fashion for a long time now, particularly of late when we started to see things unravel and a lot of chaos just kind of find its way into just our day to day lives. And but what I thought about just the other night, I was with a group of women, Black women, DEI professionals, and we were all just kind of holding space for each other and just really leaning into community. And one thing that we said was how much we appreciated that. And then we transitioned to share, are we assuming that the masses automatically know what it means to be in community, relying on your community, lean on your, what does that look like in practice? And while I think that we have a good sense of it, I wondered if we're sending this message as encouragement right now, as a tool and a way for people to survive and to thrive during this very tumultuous time, then are we doing enough to ensure that people understand what that looks like in practice? And I'm of the belief, Dr. Pruden, that maybe not everybody knows what that means and what that looks like, or maybe not to the depth in which they can fully optimize it. So, share with us, what are your perceptions of when we're hearing this language around lean into your community, really, rely on that sense of community to be grounded and centered? What does that look like for you in practice?
Absolutely. And the phrase itself may not be so widespread as it sounds. Community sounds very big and very huge. And
Yes, yes.
we can be talking about a trusted friend where you can have unfiltered conversations. You need to have a safe space where you can have unfiltered conversations, where you can show and exhibit how things are emotionally and mentally impacting you, and say it in a way where you don't have to worry about judgment. So that is what I am talking
Yeah,
about in terms of community, whether that is one person or whether that is four people. We all need, preferably you already established these type of relationships before this type of atmosphere shows itself, because it's hard to get that type of relationship during the storm. But when I say community, I am talking about having someone that you can have a unfiltered, non-judgmental conversation with about how you really feel, because we cannot help and assist one another if we cannot articulate what we're really feeling. And a lot of times that's when we're most vulnerable. And a lot of times us as leaders, for those who are in leadership, we don't have a safe space to be able to say how we really feel, because we feel as though that we aren't allowed to be vulnerable because so many eyes are on us. But everyone preferably should have at least one or two, a handful of people at least, that you can talk to in an unfiltered way, so that you can put out there into the ether how you really feel, so that that you can hear the words, because there's power in saying those words for yourself, because then you can prescribe something or tap into your benefits to address it. But yeah, we're not talking about 50,
yeah,
60 people. We're talking about a trusted person, and that can be just one person. Many of us only
that's true.
have less than five people that are like that in our lives.
Yeah. So find your people, find your tribe. And I love what Dr. Pruden has offered in terms of just the clarity around when we say community, we're not meaning any and everybody, right? We are meaning people who are your people that you can feel safe around, people that you can just commune with in a way where you feel like you are supported, that you matter, you're seen, you're valued, you're heard. There's some shared common values there that you all can gravitate to, and you're getting some positive energy. I mean, we know when we're in spaces where the energy that's being put out is not positive, and it messes up our nervous system. So people that you can feel really a lot of sense of comfort around. And that's important because when you feel a sense of safety, then you can really express yourself in a way where you feel, uninhibited, and you don't feel judged. You don't feel like, someone is sitting back and like using all that data to be able to use it against you and weaponize it against you. And so community is so important. And to your point, it could mean small groups. I'm finding that people right now, especially when we think about the workplace, they're finding even small communities within the workplace. That could be if you're a part of an ERG or a BRG, business resource group, employee resource group, connecting with those individuals. I saw an article recently to where someone wrote about how right now is incredibly important to have a work bestie. And they were saying that one-to-one work bestie relationship is part of that person's community, their safety. So anyway, I believe in community, and I wanted to take a time to just kind of delve into that. So thank you for following me in that regard. So Dr. Pruden, as someone who has dedicated years to leadership and professional development, what trends are you seeing that you believe will really help shape the future of diversity, equity, and inclusion, or whatever people are calling it these days, all the sentiments of it, right? That's never going to go away. And what advice would you give to organizations that are looking to stay to course, even in the midst of what we are seeing and experiencing from the new administration?
Absolutely. And so the trend that I'm seeing, aside from the fact of what's going on based on the most recent executive orders, is acknowledgement of intersectionality. We are complex individuals. For instance, before you, I am not just a woman. I am a woman who happens to be a African American woman. I am a woman over 40. I am a woman who is highly educated. I am a woman who came from a very meager background. I am all of those boxes. And so, as an employer or as a business, you cannot look at your customers or your employees in a single lane fashion in terms of any particular demographic. It is the intersectionality of all of us and what we bring to the table and how we respond to things in the workplace, how we respond to things in the market, verbal behavior, what our triggers are. It is based on all that. And so, what does that mean? That means that as a business or as an employer of these individuals, you need to understand that particular individual. So, no more surface relationships. Supervisors of people, you need to know your people. Part of knowing your people is knowing how that intersectionality plays and comes out in the workplace, how it comes out in interpretation of language and phrasing and different things. It has a lot to do with the messaging that you put out. The same thing with ones who are doing business. If you're doing business, you need to understand the customer and all of the boxes that your customer fit in. And you cannot
Right.
put them in one or two particular boxes. We are very complex people. So the intersectionality is one thing. Another thing is the impact of technology, particularly AI, on how we gather our metrics for DEI type programs. I think what you don't measure, there's a problem with things you don't measure. You can't hold people accountable. And so the integration of technology such as AI driven tools to analyze any type of workforce data. Where are you getting your applicants from? If you say that you can't find applicants, where are you tapping into them? What do they look like? How long do they stay in the employment recruitment process? What does your geographical area around your business for brick and mortar? What are the demographics for that area? Because you need to source outside of that area if you're looking for more
Right.
diverse individuals. And so the impact of AI on our workforce data that we collect is going to be huge, because a lot of us are using AI in terms of looking at our applications. And many times your applications do not even be seen by somebody until it goes through the electronic system for applications. And so also the shift towards tying the metrics for DEI into leadership. We have to hold people accountable. If you truly believe in the business case of diversity, equity, and inclusion, then it needs to be tied into the metrics for performance for our leaders.
Mm, yeah.
And a lot of times that is not done. And so I think the trends is the higher accountability for leadership in terms of putting it in their performance plan, their performance goals. I think the impact of AI, technology driven AI, and truly understanding your people beyond the surface relationship and understanding the intersectionality of your workforce are going to be the trends that we need to move forward with in order to succeed using in order to succeed by implementing what our DE&I goals are.
Yeah, no, we are so closely aligned. What gets measured gets done, but also where you hold people accountable, they will deliver. So the two together work in concert, and we cannot have one without the other. And to your point about intersectionality, I agree. And I think that the more that our world continues to become even more diverse, and we're seeing that, I think that's why there's such a scare from the current administration and those who support those philosophies, is that they really are trying to maintain white power. And but what maybe they're not realizing is that we're finding ourselves in this global world where the global majority are minorities, and we're going to see that even more. So the intersectionality, and not just across age, race, and gender, but so many other dimensions as well. It's like you said, we are complex beings. And if we aren't leaning into that and understanding what that looks like in terms of talent engagement and healthy workplace cultures, we're going to be left behind. And then you mentioned AI, which is something that I am, continuing to clearly watch. One of the LinkedIn learning courses that I have out there is about the intersectionality of AI and DEI. And I talk about the ways that if we aren't careful, it can be harmful. And that course was released even before the relatively recent news of the fact checking mechanism being taken away by some of the social media platforms that many of us are a part of. And so I believe that that's going to impact a lot of what's now showing up in AI. So even greater responsibility to use it in a very ethical way, and to be careful how in which we are, deploying that within our organizations as a standard of use. What are some guardrails we're going to put around that to make sure that we are aligning with all of the ways in which it can't create harm for people. So I love that. I want to address the trend that I am seeing right now that's in addition to what you named, but I'm going to put this directly in context of all the executive orders and some of the changes that are coming down. One trend that I am seeing is that there are some private organizations that are leaning into what I am referring to almost as a knee-jerk reaction based upon what has been ordered and directed for federal. And I just want to name that I think it's incredibly important for us to realize that an executive order is not a law or legislation for private sector. So I think there's value into pausing, reflecting, pulling together all of your key stakeholders, your legal folks, your DEI, leaders, all of the individuals that certainly need to be a part of the decision-making process for how do we weather the storm? How do we continue to do this important work, but to set ourselves up for success based upon what we can anticipate? And we can't anticipate a lot, but based upon at least some really guided intel that helps us to be able to do the right thing. What I don't want to see happen is for the work to be, through knee-jerk reactions, so diluted or just taken away, where we are now erasing a lot of the hard work that has gone forth in getting us to where we are. The other thing that I will say too is I know that my firm has been a part of a lot of conversations with organizations who are doing just what I described, pulling together their key stakeholders and having this dialogue. And I think that's critically important. And let's keep hope. Let's keep hope. You mentioned earlier about the language. I'm not sure if everyone in this community caught that, but what Dr. Pruden was referring to, and what probably many of you are keenly aware of, is that some of these executive orders, again, relative to the federal realm, they have certainly explicitly named that it is not sufficient to just kind of reimagine the name or change the nomenclature, but still continue to do the work. So much so to where they're saying, if you know that of organizations or consultant partners or leaders who are in that space, and that's what you perceive, you need to report that to avoid negative consequences. And we all can read between the lines, but it has a lot of people scared. And so I think it's just important for us to make sure that the private sector is not letting fear overtake them to a place of no return when there's a lot of foundation and many of those organizations that I believe have good roots. And so anything you want to say about that, Dr. Pruden?
Hey, you must be my sister from another mother or something, because I echo and I co-sign everything that you've said. I think if organizations keep in mind the business case
Mhm.
for diversity, equity, and inclusion, it is a business reason why we incorporate DE&I. It is, in many cases, it's multifaceted, but as long as we stay focused on the business case in terms of most organizations who have focused on DE&I tend to be more profitable, tend to be more
Mhm.
viewed greatly by their customers, because their workforce tend to get feedback by way of surveys from their customers and from their workforce. They also, their workforce in terms of demographics, more than likely representative of their customers. Their employees represent who their customers are, because they're very intentional in terms of that. But there is a business case for DE&I. And so if you are a private business, we're in the business to be successful. And so if you stay focused on what are the quantitative metrics, of course, everybody who knows me know I'm a data geek. So what are the quantitative and why quantitative and not qualitative? Why not opinions and thoughts versus your metrics and because they can be irrefutable. You can't dispute quantitative data.
Yeah.
It can be repeated over and over and over again. And so for private businesses to focus on the business case of the need for DE&I programs, I think that'll keep them from going down the rabbit hole of doing all these knee-jerk responses, because business has to keep on. Business needs to go on in terms of profitability, sustainability, and competitiveness. And DE&I programs have shown that those businesses that incorporate it throughout the business, not just in one department, not just in
Embedded.
recruitment, not just in recruitment, throughout the business, have shown, data has shown that those businesses are more profitable, more competitive, and can sustain themselves.
Yeah, it has to be institutionalized, embedded across all areas of operations. That is why I often say that the work of DEI is very horizontal. It is not vertical. It extends across everything. And so, that honestly, that point gives me hope. And in spite of all that we're hearing and we're experiencing, because there's no way really you can separate the sentiments and the essence of the work, no matter how many executive orders or how many, rules and laws you put in place, because it's really about just conscious leadership. It is about good, solid, people management, healthy cultures, respect, dignity, all of those things that should make all of us who we are. And so I just want to make that point. It's not going away, no matter how in which we may see it shift over time. And I agree with you. I think that sometimes there are a lot of organizations that gravitate to the quantitative data, but I also am a big advocate of aligning that quantitative data with the qualitative data, because the qualitative is what then gives us the intel that allows us to know, well, what to do about the data from a quantitative perspective. How exactly do we need to shift and modify so that we can make those changes? And I think sometimes, if we don't amplify that, we will lead ourselves and our clients to a place to where they're just looking at the bottom line numbers, and they're not disaggregating it and seeing how maybe that percentage is, maybe a different response for a different population of people based upon demographics. And so there's so much to be considered in that regard. Um, so we have a comment actually a couple comments. So I'm loving the engagement that's happening in our chat. We have Takia here today. She's saying important call out when we were talking about, this is not, again, law and legislation. Dr. Jennifer has been engaged in the chat. She says, I always believe that DEI, DIB needs to be integrated into the daily business, 100%. I
Yeah.
often say, though, that what we lead with when we are communicating with different stakeholder groups is very relative to what drives that individual or that group of individuals to be motivated to do this work. And I say that because while the business imperative, the business case is critical, we can't leave that out of the conversation. There's a lot of value in that. The human aspect of this work is just really critical too. We are deserving as human beings of dignity and respect, of being treated fairly and with equity and full opportunity for success. And so I often like to make sure that I am amplifying that message. We have 15 minutes left, Dr. Pruden, and what I want to do is go ahead and invite our audience to begin thinking of any curiosities that are bubbling up for you, any questions, any commentary, anything that you would like to contribute to today's conversation. If you're part of our Zoom community, you can do so by using the raise hand feature that lets me know that I can call on you to unmute yourself. And if your camera is on, I will even add you to the spotlight. If you're just listening and you want your question to be presented on your behalf, you can place it into the chat. And the same for our LinkedIn live community. You can go to the comment section and add your questions or comments there. While you're thinking on that, I'm going to go ahead and move to my next question just to give you a little bit of time to formulate what is of most interest to you. And I want to talk now about some of the biggest misconceptions, misunderstandings that you've seen in your 30 years line of work around equity in the workplace, and how can organizations shift from focusing on equality to ensuring true equity?
Oh, I love this question. So, one of the biggest misconceptions that I see is that equity and equality are synonyms for one another.
Yep.
They are not.
Yep.
They are
They're
not.
not the same. Mm-mm.
They're
Yep.
not the same. So, equality is when you provide the same thing in a short form, you provide the same thing to everybody without any consideration for assessment of where they are, what they need. You just give everybody. I'll give you a real life example. I have $100, and let's say somebody beside me has $2. You decide you want to be. You use the term equitable when you want to give everybody $5. Well, let's say, so now I have $105 and the person beside me still has less than $10. I probably didn't need that extra $5, but I guarantee you what you gave the person beside me, which equates to less than $10, probably need a lot more. So that's where we move into equity. Equity is an assessment of what a person needs to get to the level that you're trying to take them to. And that will be different for each person. And so this is the reason why equality and equity are different, is because you have to have an individual assessment of what does that person need, and I'm going to give that specific person what he or she needs, and it does not have to equate to what I gave the person on either side of them. It is what they need in order to accomplish the goal. And so I think businesses who have a true, who have the true definition, operate with the true definition of equity and equality. There is a place for both in the workplace.
Oh, yeah.
However, it is not when you are talking about accomplishing goals. It is not when you are talking about productivity, because there's a uniqueness to all of us that's quite different than what we bring to the workplace in terms of our education, our experience, and our talents. And so,
Mhm.
although the goal may be the same, it may be different to provide the resource. And as an employer, we are responsible for providing the resources that our employees need to get the job done. It doesn't say the same resources for every employee, the resource for that particular employee to get the job done. So you have to have an assessment, then you have to provide them the resources according to what that assessment shows, in order for them to reach the goal. And so it's just something that is very critical to any business being successful, because it is a different way to look at your employees. And it's
Right.
a requirement that you have to assess your employees to figure out what their needs are before you decide what resources you're going to give them.
Absolutely. I think that's why the saying of equity is a choice. You have to first and foremost choose to have operate with the lens of equity, which requires you to get the data to understand where the disparities exist. Because to your point, people have vastly different needs, different starting places, right? And so, if equality is the hope for end, which it is, then equity is the means to get there. So we can't get there without the equity piece. And so I often like to say that, equality is giving everyone a shoe, but then equity is giving everyone a shoe that fits, right? I mean, it does me no good if you give me a shoe that's like 10 sizes too big for me. I'm just going to flop out of it. And so we have to use that same logical thinking when it comes to the workplace. Do we have a process and a system by which we are offering opportunities fairly and equitably for professional development across the board? Because what someone may need some upskilling around may not be the same for another individual, right? And so I think a lot of times that is where many organizations get tripped up, is the equity piece, because they see it as, well, I'm not being fair and I don't want to undermine the others who may be a little bit further ahead. But to me, that's when we have to educate about the historical perspective of why we are where we are and how these systemic issues continue to show forth. And that is what the current administration completely misses, because they're not choosing equity, and they don't want to choose equity. And so when people show you who they are, you believe them, right? So I appreciate you kind of breaking that down for us. That definitely is a misconception that the two are synonymous. I'm not seeing any hands, and so I'm going to keep going, leveraging these moments that we have left. I want to talk now about, because you mentioned earlier the importance of intersectionality. And so, how can leaders better understand and address intersectionality in the workplace in terms of ensuring that all employees feel seen, valued, and heard? Especially when sometimes we don't know all of these different intersecting dimensions of diversity that someone may have.
So I had mentioned talking to and getting to know your people. And of course, we know that looks different for various levels throughout an organization, depending on how many levels are within an organization. So there needs to be other ways that employees can also communicate, just communicate whatever it is that they want to
Yeah.
communicate. And so you can have a email address that employees can send an email to. You can have town halls. I recommend having departmental, division, company-wide meetings on a regular basis, and regular could be quarterly, it could be biannually and annually at different levels. I think it is critical that messaging happens to the masses at one particular time from the authority who is giving the message. For instance, the CEO, CFO, or whoever's the head. Employees should hear from them at certain times. Also, walk in and talk to your people.
Yes, those
Not
check-ins are so important.
not text, not email. Walk in and talk to your people. Now, for the higher up you get, your employees may be scattered, some, among countries and states and different things.
Yeah.
I understand that. But for your employees where you can walk in to and talk to them, get up from behind your desk and go talk to them so that you can see the nonverbals that are associated with the message. We miss a
Mm.
lot of things that will call to our attention, additional questions, because we communicate through email. And email has no nonverbals associated, and I don't care how much you capitalize them or whatever, it still doesn't have any nonverbals. But I have had employees who walk past me, and I know that they're normally a jolly, happy-go-lucky type person, and they walk past me, and my spirit says something is wrong with this employee. And so when they walk to their office, I'm right behind them. As soon as they get in there, hey, how's it going? You okay? You want to talk? You need to, your employees will value that. And so, in addition to all of the different boxes that we put ourselves in, the only way that you're going to really get to know your employees and get to know your customers is through multiple ways that you allow them to communicate with you and that you communicate with them. And so you have to show up. You have to show up sometimes so that you can get to know them, get to know what's going on. A lot of employers have employees who are pursuing certification and degrees, and the only way that they know about it is when the employee turned in their notice because they're going on to a competitor. How is it that you've had somebody doing all of this and you were unaware that they were doing all of this? And so, yeah, communication is critical, and communication beyond those surface conversations.
I agree. There was so much that you said in that last clip that really resonates with me. I do believe that proximity really helps us to build and cultivate those relationships. Not to say that we can't do them when in other forms, but there's something about just sitting across from someone or breaking bread with someone and really being able to feel the energy, to read the body language as you're building and cultivating those relationships. I do realize that it's harder these days because of the hybrid work distributed, workforce environment. And that's why a lot of companies are, mandating, return to office type of situations. And that's creating some challenges for a lot of employers
Mhm.
because they're saying, well, that may have fixed one thing that's now creating another host of other challenges in terms of, I don't feel safe in the environment. I have childcare issues. There's a variety of reasons that I know I have heard people not be in favor of their, a mandate for a return to office. But as you were sharing, Dr. Pruden, one word that kept coming up for me was, which is my favorite word, is just be intentional. Be intentional. The
Yes.
surface level is not being intentional. How do we go deeper? How do we really get to know our people? And that takes a lot of work. And I think that's why it's challenging a lot of leaders these days. It's because we are now finding ourselves in these overworked cultures, right? To where they almost feel like unless something significantly changes, I don't have the bandwidth to be able to go deep with all of the folks that I really want to cultivate relationships with. And that's a problem and that's a challenge. And I think that we really need to help organizations figure out. The other thing that came up for me that I wanted to comment on as you were sharing is the way that we learn about people's dimensions of diversity and some of those intersectionality um, intel is through sharing of our own stories. That's why I'm so
Mhm.
big on storytelling. I know that you've referenced that today as well. I believe that when we share stories, we make ourselves vulnerable as leaders, which means that it gives others permission to then say, well, you know what, you're dealing with that. Well, here's my situation. And that therein lies this powerful opportunity just for a deeper connection around some type of common ground, even if it's just simply understanding that, you know what, you go through some hard times too, right? You have your lovelies and you have your hearts too. And there's just something really powerful about that that I think we all can learn from and benefit from, especially during trying times like this where we really need our community, right? So, well, we're getting to the end of our time together today, and I want to first and foremost thank you for sharing with us and for being a part of our community. We really appreciate the gifting of the free download document that you provided. I want to give you a chance to close us out, Dr. Pruden, in whatever way that feels appropriate to you. Perhaps we haven't touched on something that you're really feeling closely connected to, and you want to socialize that with this community. I want to give you a chance to do so at this time.
Absolutely. So I've had a ball. I love these type of discussions, and so thank you for having me. In closing, I just encourage everyone to stay in contact with me. LinkedIn is my playground. That's where I hang out the most. If you want to find what's going on with me, and what I'm into, as well as I also look into when we're attached what you're doing. And I believe in just showing up and taking a relationship off of the virtual spectrum into the in person spectrum if you post what's going on with you. And so, yeah, let's stay connected. I have a community that's called Sister Leaders Community, which is one of the divisions of my business. And of course, the Sister Leaders Community is a community of men and women who are committed to increasing the number of women in senior leadership. And of course, senior leadership looks different depending on the structure of your organization. But what we focus on is sharing education, experiences, and networks in order to increase the number of women in senior leadership. I've been in senior leadership for about 15, 16 years. I'm moving towards a 30-year career, and I could not have done this without mentorship. Some of you who are aware of me may know that my first mentor came off of a direct message on LinkedIn. Yes, a direct message on LinkedIn when I was stuck in middle management for about a decade and I wanted to be in senior leadership. I was smart enough to know that I didn't know what I needed to be in leadership. And so I was looking for a woman mentor. I didn't know any woman mentor. LinkedIn was about 5 years old back then. We were still trying to figure it out. And so I shot a copy of my resume to my two top choices. I happened to pick out a woman, a Black woman who was a vice president or higher and had been there for 10 years. My number one choice got back to me and she said yes. for $350 an hour. Now, this was about 16 years ago.
Yes.
What do you do when someone has the blueprint to your goals and they are there? I buckled down and I negotiated for 1 hour a month because that's all I could afford. One extra $350. And I signed a 1 year contract with her. And she worked with me. She didn't cut me off at 60 minutes, in case you're wondering. Signed a contract with her and worked with her for a year. And then right after that year, I was invited to apply for a C-suite position. And I have been in senior leadership since then. So about 16 years, I worked for 6 different industries. Mentorship and sponsorship are critical. Find yourself a mentor. Even better, find yourself a sponsor, someone who will use their influence to welcome you into circles that you haven't been invited in before. That is what I stand for. That is what the Sister Leaders community stand for. We also have our annual conference that's coming up October 3rd and 4th at the Rivers Casino in Portsmouth, Virginia. So I'm very excited about that. The website is sisterleadersconference.com. And we're also looking for speakers. So if you happen to be a subject matter expert who are looking for a platform, hit me up because speaker opportunities are available. We can all do this. We talked about community in closing.
Yes.
I will not be where I am without community, without touching base with like-minded individuals, and in some cases, people who were very different from me, not necessarily
Right.
like-minded, because I learned from those individuals as well. Let's create our own community. Let's be part of each other's community, and let's soar.
Well said. The Sisters Leaders community rocks. That's one of the comments from our guests today. So excited for the opportunities that you're making available to people. And again, appreciate your time today. Thank you to this community and this audience for sharing. If you have learned something today and you found this conversation valuable, please be sure to share the replay when it's available, which will be later today. Or you also can catch the podcast. We do extract the audio of our podcast and make it available in podcast capacity for wherever people like to get their podcast content. So thank you so much. Have a wonderful, safe weekend. And we look forward to seeing you back here for another episode of Intentional Conversations next Friday. Thank you. Bye-bye.